So this problem says neon green is a paint color that contains the colors yellow and green in the ratio 3:5 by volume. Show your thinking for each. Before we read the questions, let's talk about what this means exactly to have a ratio of 3:5. Notice that they put the color yellow first. So since they put yellow first, the number 3 goes with yellow. And since they put the word green second, that actually doesn't look very much like green, does it? Let's do this one. Then the second number would represent the green ratio. So if we knew that we had 3 milliliters of yellow paint, that means we would need 5 milliliters of green paint to mix with it to make neon green in the exact color that we need it to be. But let's say we had 6 milliliters of yellow paint. Well, how much green paint would we need to make the same ratio? Since we multiplied the number of green up by 2, the number of yellow up by 2, we would also need to multiply the number of green up by 2. So that would make, if we had 6 milliliters of yellow, we would need 10 milliliters of green. So that's just the general concept. If we go on to this problem, we can do these types of problems algebraically, let's do these types of problems algebraically using a proportion. So using proportions, that means if we put the ratio of yellow divided by green, that ratio would have to be equal on both fractions. So we could put yellow over green here as well. The way we can use this is we can put the ratio that they gave us in the problem on one side. So yellow would be 3. Actually, let me do this. Yellow would be 3, where green is 5. And that would equal any other ratio that they gave us in a problem. So for part A, it says, how many milliliters of yellow paint are there for 100 milliliters of green paint? So if we're looking for the number of milliliters of yellow paint, we can put a variable there, like X. And notice that I put the X on top because I put yellow on top in this fraction. So I need to put yellow on top in this fraction as well. And they tell us that we have 100 milliliters of green paint. So the green goes on the bottom. I'll put 100 on the bottom here. So this is our proportion setup. Once we get our proportions set up, we can use the crisscross method, or you might call it the butterfly method, depends on how you look at it. But that means that the bottom of the fraction will multiply by the top of the other side on both sides. So that will make 3 times 100 is 300, and 5 times x is 5x. So that's the way we can get rid of the denominator. And then we can finish solving for x by dividing by the coefficient of x. We divide by 5 on both sides. Grab a calculator. 300 divided by 5 is 60. So that means 60 is equal to x, or we would need 60 milliliters of yellow paint for 100 milliliters of green paint. For part B, if we have 100 milliliters of yellow paint, then we'll put the 100 on the top with the yellow. So we can set up a similar fraction. This was part A. If we set up a similar fraction or similar proportion, we can keep the 3 over 5, and that represents yellow over green. So then if we have 100 milliliters of yellow paint, we'll need to put the 100 on the top because that's where yellow goes, right? It has to be consistent. If we put 3 on top, which represents yellow, we would also need to put 100 on top to represent the yellow. And now we're looking for the milliliters of green paint, we can put the X on the bottom this time. And once we set up our proportion, we can use our crisscross or our butterfly method to multiply the bottom times the top of each side. And we would get 3 times X, which is 3X, is equal to 5 times 100, which is 500. And from here, again, we need to divide both sides by the coefficient of X to get the X by itself. Divide both sides by 3. And we would get X is equal to, this time 500 divided by 3. It doesn't simplify to a perfect whole number. It gives us 166.67 rounded. It's really 6 repeating. So we could leave it in a fraction, as it would be exact to leave it as 500 over 3, but you usually wouldn't be looking for 500 over 3 milliliters of paint. So we can round it to like 166.67, I think would be reasonable. So that would be 166.67 milliliters of green paint if we have 100 milliliters of yellow paint. For part C, this question's a little bit different because it asks how many milliliters of each color is present in 100 milliliters of neon green paint. So the 100 milliliters of neon green paint is the total. So we actually need to make a new ratio. If we know that it's a 3 to 5 of yellow to green, that means the total would be 3 plus 5, which is 8. So the neon green would be 8 milliliters in total, and that would, we could also compare that to the 3 to 5. So for 3 milliliters of yellow paint and 5 milliliters of green paint, that makes 8 milliliters of total paint. We can start by making a new ratio. Let's say we make a yellow over total ratio. So if we make yellow, if we do yellow over total, we can pick either one to start with. If we do yellow over total, then yellow is represented by 3. So we can do 3 over total, which is represented by 8. And that would be equal to, the number in the problem that they gave us is 100 milliliters of the green paint. So that would represent the total, because that's the sum of, that's the total neon green paint. So the 100 in this case would go on the bottom. And we're looking for, because we put yellow on top, this X would represent the number of milliliters of yellow paint. So then doing the cross multiplication, we get 300 is equal to 8x, and then divide both sides by 8 to get 300 divided by 8 is 37.5. So that makes 37.5 would be our X value. And remember that we put yellow on the top. So that would be, let me give myself a little bit more room. We would have 37.5 milliliters of yellow paint. And then we could set up a similar, like do green over total. But if we know that the total is 100 and we have 300 or 37.5 milliliters of yellow, we can just subtract that the total minus the amount of yellow, because we only have yellow and green. If we do 100 minus 37.5, we get that to be 62.5 milliliters of green, because we only have yellow and green in the mixture, so the two would have to add up to be 100. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments, or if you'd like to see a video on another problem that's math or chemistry or physics, feel free to leave that in the comments as well, or to email me at the email that's down in the description. Also, down in the description gives you some information about how to contact me privately through my Facebook or my Patreon, which also has some problems that are worked out in a step-by-step written fashion as opposed to this video fashion. So if you'd like to see a written fashion, check out my Patreon page. Thanks for watching.